Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Chaf Dalid. Here's an outline of the sugya that we're in the middle of. We saw three answers to a question. Now we're going to see a fourth answer. The question was against the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that in a Zavla court, meaning a court where each litigant picks a judge and then they pick the third judge, according to the Bi Meir, one of the litigants can disqualify the witnesses of the other litigant. Right? The litigant, the plaintiff, brings witnesses. It says you owe me $100, and the other litigant can say, "No, I don't like your witnesses." So we asked, how could that be? Even the Rabbi Meir agrees that regarding the judges, if a judge is an expert judge, then one plaintiff cannot go and disqualify the judge, and a witness therefore should be the same thing, because a witness doesn't need any specific qualifications. How can we have a court case where one of the plaintiffs, the defendant, just says to the defendant, tells the plaintiff, "Oh, I don't accept your witnesses"? That was the question. So far, we saw three answers. The first one was that of Resh Lakish, who said, "Pe kadosh yomar davar zeh." Can it be that the holy mouth of Rabbi Meir would say such a law? No, it can't be. It must be that we misunderstood it. And actually, it should be only one witness. If the plaintiff brings one single witness and the defendant initially agreed and said, "Okay, I'll accept one witness like two," and then they say, "You know what? I changed my mind." Rabbi Meir says he can change his mind. That's what Rabbi Meir must have meant. Resh Lakish had so much respect for Rabbi Meir, he said it can't be Rabbi Meir would say something that didn't make any sense. We're going to come back to this line today. The second answer was a Biel Azad, Bebahu ve'ached leposlan, means the defendant has another witness with him that say that there's something wrong with those witnesses. So it's not just that the defendant, litigant, says, "Oh, I don't like it." He can't just say, "I don't like your witness." He has to bring proof, and he brings together with him another witness. That was the second. The third is from Rav Dimi, when he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. He quoted the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that we're talking about a case where the plaintiff has two sets of witnesses. And so he won't lose the case because of this, even if the defendant says, "I don't accept this first set of witnesses." It's okay, because the plaintiff has a second set of witnesses, and so he still has a case. Now it's true, if the second set of witnesses end up being no good, and we already disqualified the first set of witnesses, then the prosecution will be in trouble. That's true. Okay, but that's the way it is. So the Mishnah is limited to a case of two sets of witnesses, and if in fact there's only one set of witnesses, then indeed the defendant cannot disqualify the witnesses of the plaintiff without solid reason. Okay, that was Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and now we're going to see the answer of Ravin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. What makes it apparent that Rabbi Yochanan taught something and two of his students interpreted it slightly differently. But we'll see there is actually a common denominator between these two reports from Rabbi Yochanan. Ki ata Rabin amar Rabbi Yochanan, resha be'edim pesulin ve'dayanin kesherin. Migo de pasla edim pasle nami dayaneh. Sefa be'dayanin pesulin ve'edim kesherin. De migo de pasle dayanin pasle nami edim. This explanation says that the Resha, the earlier clause in the Mishnah that says that the defendant can disqualify the judge of the plaintiff, that's talking about a case where the plaintiff brings his judge and his witnesses, and the defendant says, "Both your judge and your witnesses are no good." But he only has proof that the witnesses are no good. He brings absolute proof that these witnesses are bad, and even though the judges, he doesn't have any proof about that, and so the judges technically are fine. However, we apply amigo. Since there is proof that the witnesses are no good, so therefore the defendant was able to bring proof that the witnesses that the plaintiff brought are no good, well then we say, since you already proved that the witnesses are no good, we will give you the right to just say that the judge is also disqualified. That's the amigo argument. You weakened the plaintiff so much regarding one thing, so then we will accept your claim regarding the other thing also, even though you don't have proof. That was the previous clause. And then the next clause in the Mishnah, which is the one that we're dealing with, that says that the defendant can disqualify the witnesses of the other, That's also talking about where the witness brought both a judge and witnesses, and the defendant says both are no good. But he only proved it regarding the judge. He proved that this judge is bad judge. And even though he did not bring any proof regarding the witnesses, but we apply a migo. Since the defendant was able to prove that the judge is disqualified, we accept their claim that the witness is also disqualified. That's the case we're talking about. You can't just come randomly and say, I don't like these witnesses. But if you already broke the case of the plaintiff halfway regarding the judges, only then will we accept that the witnesses also are no good, even without proof. That is what Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Matkif la Rabba, bishlam amigo de pesle edim pesle nami dayaneh, ika bedina acharina. Rava says, I don't accept this answer. I understand the first half of what you said, the first migo, where you said that since the witnesses are proven to be no good, so then we disqualify the judges also. That's okay to do because even if this bet din is not usable anymore, we can always go to another bet din. So the plaintiff won't lose out his case altogether. His witnesses were proven to be wrong. That's true. And so then we say, all right, since the witnesses are no good, we'll accept your claim that the judge is no good. And then he'll come to another court and he'll try again in another court. So he has recourse at least. El amigo de pasle dayaneh, pasle name edim, va'edim tuleka. But if you say the other migo, this migo that is for the clause that we are trying to explain, that since the judges are no good, therefore we accept your claim that the witnesses are no good even without proof. But that's not fair to the plaintiff because he doesn't have other witnesses. Likely he only has two witnesses, and then if you say, well, I proved the judges are no good, okay, fine, the judges are no good, then we'll accept your claim without any proof that the witnesses are no good. What do you mean? I don't have any other witnesses. If you just use a migo to wipe out the plaintiff's witnesses, then it's going to wipe out his whole case. That's not fair. And so the answer is, La sericha de'ika katacheret. Oh, you know what? Even Rabin's answer here is assuming that the plaintiff has two sets of witnesses, and therefore he comes and says, I prove that your judge is no good. I claim that your first set of witnesses is also no good. Oh, well, since you proved one, we'll accept your claim to the other. But don't worry, plaintiff, you have another set of witnesses, right? Yes, I do. Okay, then we disqualify the first witnesses. Haleka katacheret mai, hachiname delama se pasle, hainu deravdimi. According to this logic, if the plaintiff only has one set of witnesses, then what would you say? Oh, then you'd say that the defendant cannot disqualify the witnesses of the plaintiff. Even if he proves that the judge is no good, we're not going to accept this migo because you can't take away all of his witnesses. Right, so that, if indeed that's true, well then that's the same as Rav Dimi. Ravin, who's quoting in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, would be saying basically the same thing as Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi also said that if there is two sets of witnesses, then the plaintiff can say, I reject one of them. But if there's only one set of witnesses, then you can't. So this is very similar to Rav Dimi. So what is he saying? He's coming from Eretz Yisrael saying, no, I say something different. What's different about what you said? And the answer is, the difference is regarding this migo argument. Ravin, who says this last answer, adds another level. You have to also have a migo that the defendant has to say, oh, I disqualified your judge, and therefore, if you also have two sets of witnesses, then I can take away one of your sets of witnesses as well. But you have to do the migo. Whereas Rav Dimi says, no, we don't do this migo, and the defendant can come and just say, you have two sets of witnesses, I don't like this first one, and we don't need the migo that you also disqualified the judge is independent of disqualifying the judge. And now we understand all four answers. And very interestingly, we can see how the two traditions in the name of Rabbi Yochanan might have come from one place. Rabbi Yochanan might have said something short, like, oh, this only applies when there's two sets of witnesses, not one set of witnesses. And then the students had to explain, oh, why is that? What cases are talking about with amigo, without amigo? And they elaborated on what Rabbi Yochanan had said. Gufa, Amar Resh Lakish, Pekadosh Yomar Davar Zeh, Teneh Edo. Now going back to the previous answer, Resh Lakish wondered about a Bi Meir. Bi Meir, a holy mouth, would say such a law that you could disqualify 2 witnesses just like that. No, it must be he meant only 1 witness. The plaintiff brought 1 witness, and that's why. And first he accepted it. The defendant accepted it, and then he changed his mind, and that's what Rabbi Meir says. Okay, you can change your mind. Okay, getting back to that, Ini v'amad ula haroet Resh Lakish bet midrash kilu oker harim v'tochanan ze bazeh. Would Resh Lakish really refer to the Bi Meir as a holy mouth? Ula, after all, said that anyone who saw Resh Lakish in the Bet Midrash, you would see how great Resh Lakish was. It's like he was uprooting mountains and grinding them into each other. Resh Lakish could take any sources, that's like the mountains, like Har Sinai, and whatever sources he was taking, and he would smash them. He would ask really tough questions. He was super, super sharp. And therefore, why did Resh Lakish give honor to the Bi Meir if Resh Lakish himself was actually so great? And Amar Ravina, Ravina says, wait, that's not a question, Ula. If you had seen the Bi Meir in the Bet Midrash, you would see that he uproots the highest of mountains and grinds them into each other. Okay, Resh Lakish is great. The Bi Meir is even greater. So what's your question? Of course, Resh Lakish, who by the way is Amorah, a second generation Amorah, certainly he could give deference and honor to the Bi Meir, a student of Rabbi Akiba, 4th generation Tana. So he says, I understand. I agree that Resh Lakish is great, but Rabbi Meir is even greater. And so Resh Lakish, it's appropriate for him to say a holy mouth. How can he say that? So the answer is Ula was not asking a question. How could the Bi Meir say this? How could Resh Lakish give honor to the Bi Meir? He was stating a fact. He was giving praise. He was saying, "Come look at how much the sages love each other." Even though Resh Lakish was himself very sharp, a great Torah scholar, he could smash mountains together. Nevertheless, he looked up to the Bi Meir and showed the Bi Meir reverence. It says, "Oh, holy mouth! How could he say that?" We have to understand what his words really meant. And now we bring another story that shows how the rabbis loved each other, and we're going to show this is true in Eretz Israel in particular. The rabbis there showed love and reverence for each other. So Rabbi, that's Yehuda Nasi, he was sitting and he was giving a halacha that one is not allowed to insulate cold food on Shabbat. Let's say you have something cold, you want to keep it cold, so you insulate it in sand or something that's cold to keep it cold. He says you're not allowed to do this. Now why? It's not cooking. The answer is, well, it's a gezerah, because when it comes to hot things, you cannot insulate hot things on Shabbat. This is for sure if it's insulation that's going to add heat. If there's something that has a chemical reaction that actually makes it hotter and you insulate something in it, then that will be cooking. So you're not allowed to insulate any hot things on Shabbat. And because people will get confused between hot things and cold things, if you allow insulating cold things to keep them cold, people will think that you're allowed to insulate hot things to keep them hot. And so that's why the Yehuda Nasi says you're not allowed to insulate cold things on Shabbat. Amar lefanav Rabbi Ishmael b'Rabbi Yoseh Abba hitil latmin et hasonen Amar lehem kebar hora zaken. But then Rabbi Ishmael, who was a colleague of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, quoted his father Rabbi Yoseh. This is Rabbi Yoseh ben Halafta. He's a 4th generation Tana, a student of Rabbi Akiba. That's Rabbi Yoseh. Rabbi Ishmael is his son. So his son Rabbi Ishmael is a contemporary with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, about contemporary, both 5th generation. And Rabbi Ishmael told Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, my father, Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta, permitted insulating cold things on Shabbat. And after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi heard that, he said, oh, the elder already ruled on this as permitted, and so I defer to his ruling. So you see how beloved the sages were to each other in Eretz Yisrael, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, although he himself thought that this should be prohibited, when he heard that his elder said that it was permitted, he says, then I have to say it's permitted, and he deferred to the other sage's authority. אמר הפאפא, בואו ראה כמה מחבבין זה את זה. דילו רבי יוסי קיים, היה כפוף ויושב לפני רבי. The Papa adds to this story. Come and see just how much the rabbis loved each other. Because if Rabbi Yosef, the fourth generation Tana, were alive, he would have sat underneath Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and not because he's greater. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the next generation and not as great, but because of his title. Rabbi Yehuda was the Nasi, and therefore, if Rabbi Yosef was alive, he would sit and be subordinate to Rabbi. Taha Rabbi Ishmael b'Rabbi Yosef memale mekom avotav hava v'haya kafuf v'yoshev lifnei Rabbi. After all, we also see that Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, who took his father's place, and Rabbi Ishmael would sit and be subordinate before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, even though Rabbi Ishmael might have been a greater sage, actually, but still, because of the title of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he would be subordinate to him, as is appropriate. And even so, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, I defer to Rabbi Yosef. So you see how the rabbis actually show respect to each other. Rabbi Ishmael and his father Rabbi Yosef would give respect to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, even though they were greater than him because of his title. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, even though he had a greater title, he gave respect to them by saying, oh, that's the halacha, well, I will defer to that halacha. So what a beautiful thing to see that the rabbis giving honor and loving each other. Amar Rabbi Oshaya, ma dichtiv vayikach li et shenei maklot, le'achad karati noam u'lachad karati chovelim. And now we quote a pasuk in Zechariah, where Zechariah says, I took two staves, one called graciousness, the other binders, chovlim, something about hitting people. So one is a nice branch, and one is a violent branch. And he took these together. Noam, so what is this referring to with this prophecy? Noam elu tamidei chachamim sheberetz Yisrael sheman'imim ze leze b'halacha. Chovelim elu tamidei chachamim shebebavel shemechabelin ze leze Bahalacha. One of the branches that's called graciousness, that is a reference to the sages in Eretz Yisrael, because they are nice to each other. They're gracious to each other when it comes to halacha. They say, oh, what do you think? What do I think? Oh, I agree with you. What a good point you made. Whereas the word chovlim, which means injury, this is referring to the sages in Bavel, because they injure each other when it comes to halacha. They speak harshly to each other. How could you say that? That's a crazy thing to say. Why would you say such a thing? You're totally wrong. And so their style of Torah discussion and the way that they treated each other was completely different in Eretz Yisrael and in Bavel. Vayomer elai ele shnei bnei Yisrael omedim v'gomer shnayim zetim aleha. Since we quoted one pasuk from Zechariah, we're going to quote yet another prophecy of Zechariah and explain it, and it's going to relate to this as well. Zechariah sees, this is the symbol of Israel. You have the menorah in the middle and the bowls of oil on top, and then you have two trees, olive trees, on the sides. It's depicted as branches, but really in the Torah it says trees. Now, there's two pasukim that describe this prophecy. The earlier one, in pasuk 3, says they are shnayim zetim, two olive trees, on the two sides of the menorah and the bowls. However, when Zechariah says, "What does this mean?" So in the explanation, it calls them Bnei Yitzhar, the sons of the anointed ones, or the oil. So which is it? Is it trees or is it oil? So the answer is Yitzhar Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Elu Tamidei Chachamim sheberetz Yisrael shenochin ze lazeh b'halacha keshemen zayit. So in the explanation where it calls it oil, and these are the sons of oil, or the anointed ones, Rabbi Yitzchak says this is a reference to the sages in Eretz Yisrael, because they are pleasant to each other like olive oil. Olive oil tastes delicious, makes everything taste good. And so that's the sages in Eretz Yisrael. Ushnaim zetim aleha elu tamidei chachamim shebebavel shemirurim ze lazeh b'halacha kazayit. Whereas in the description of the olive trees, that is a reference to the sages in Bavel. The olive tree itself is bitter, even though olive oil is delicious. If you try to take a bite of the branch itself, it is very bitter, and that's a reference to the sages in Bavel who act in a bitter way towards each other. Of course, it's always lishma, and they're always trying to get to the bottom line of halakha, but that's there's two different approaches. One is everybody be cooperative and nice to each other and all that. In Bavel, they said, no, we have to pound each other and really, be sharp and get to the bottom of it. And you can do that better if everybody is challenging each other like an enemy, and even hopefully not to the point of physical injury, but only verbal squabbling that can sound very tough. But that's the way that in Bavel they were so heated about their Torah discussions that is described as bitter. ואשא עיני וערב והנה שתיים נשים יוסעות ורוח בכנפיהם ולהן הכנפיים ככנפי החסידה ותישאנה היפה בין השמיים ובין הארץ ואומר אל המלאך הדובר בי אנא המה מוליכות את היפה ויאמר אלי לבנות לה בית בארץ שנער. And now we're going to quote yet another pasuk in Zechariah in the next chapter, chapter 5, that has a very strange prophecy. It's a prophecy of this ephah. It's a measurement, but it's a big measurement. It's basically a tub. In the pisukim before this, it says that the tub had a lead cover on it, and the cover was lifted, and there was a woman inside, and that woman, it says, represents wickedness. And then they put the cover back on. And now in this pasuk, Zechariah says, I lifted my eyes, I saw there were two women, and the wind was in their wings, because they had wings like that of a stork, and they lifted up this measurement, this tub, between heaven and earth. So they're carrying and flying with this tub, and inside the tub, remember, is another woman who represents wickedness. And then Zechariah said to the angels, where are they taking this? And they said, we're going to build her a house in the land of Shinar. Shinar is somewhere in Bavel. And so the point is that there's going to be a building of wickedness in Bavel. So there's a negative prophecy regarding Bavel, which is called Shinar here. So now let's try to explain this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, zo chanupa vegasut haruach sheyardu leBavel. What is this referring to, this wickedness? It's specifically flattery and arrogance that came to Bavel. The people in Bavel are arrogant, and this is a prophecy that's depicting that character trait as it comes down to them. Vegasut haruach leBavel nachit v'amar mod asara kabin gasut yardu la'olam tisha natla ailam ve'achat kol ha'olam kulo. Wait, is that true? That arrogance came down to Bavel? Is that really the center point of arrogance in the world? After all, the master said that there were 10 measurements of arrogance that came to the whole world, and 9 of them went to Elam, and the rest of the world shared one. Now, Elam is over here. It's east of Bavel, right? This is down where Shushan is. And so that's a different area. So this is really the most arrogant people in the world are in Elam and not in Bavel. So this prophecy, why does it say that all the arrogance or most of the arrogance came to Bavel? And the answer is in the Bavel nachit ve'ish tarbube de ish tarbab le'ailam. Indeed, first it came to Bavel, but then it moved and spread eventually to Ailam. So yes, Elam has most of the arrogance now, but it initially landed in Bavel. And we can see this is true because the pasuk says that this measurement came down to build her a house in Eretz Shinar, meaning that was the intention, is that the house of arrogance should be in Bavel. But in the end, it wasn't so, right? So, he wanted to do this, but that means it didn't work. And so initially it was going to be in Bavel, but in the end, the people in Elam, they're actually the most arrogant. And now we challenge this, the fact that you just said that Elam is the most arrogant place, but the master said that a sign of arrogance is poverty. When people are arrogant, they tend to be also impoverished, maybe because nobody wants to deal with them, nobody wants to do business with them. So now we see but if you look, you'll see that Bavel is impoverished, but the people in Elam are rich. And so how could you say that most of the arrogance in the world went to Elam when Elam is rich and Bavel is poor? That would indicate that Bavel is the place of arrogance and not Elam. And the answer is May Aniyut Torah dichtiv achot lanu ketana v'shadayim en la. Amar Rabbi Yochanan zo Elam shezachta lilmod velo zachta lelamed. So he says, well, what is poverty here in this statement? It's not referring to monetary poverty, but rather poverty in Torah. As it says in Shir HaShirim, which is a parable, and it says, we have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What is that referring to? Rabbi Yochanan says it's referring to Elam, that had the merit to learn Torah, but not to teach Torah. Just like a woman who has no breasts cannot nurse their child, so too the sages that were in Elam, although they learned themselves, but they did not teach. They could not nurse others. They could not give over their Torah. And so that's why in Elam, the people were impoverished. Even though they were rich financially, they were impoverished in Torah. And being impoverished in Torah, that is a sign of arrogance, and that shows that the Elam is the center of arrogance. And that is what that whole prophecy was talking about. Although initially it was going to be in Bavel, in the end, Bavel's okay. They have learned people in Bavel. And it's Elam that got the arrogance and got the poverty of Torah. Mai Bavel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Belula b'Mikra, Belula b'Mishnah, Belula b'Talmud. Why is the land of Bavel called Bavel? The Torah has one explanation, but Rabbi Yochanan has another explanation, that the sages in Bavel, they learn everything all together. It's mixed up with Mikra, that's Tanakh. Mishnah is referring to the halachot, as in the Mishnah or other Baraitot, when memorized halachot of Torah Shebe'al Peh, and Talmud, which is referring not to the Gemara, because the Rabbi Yochanan is the first generation before the Gemara was composed. But Talmud rather means deriving one law from another, comparing laws. And so in Bavel, they learn all these things all mixed up together. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, they keep everything separate. In Eretz Yisrael, when they study Tanakh with the Peshat, and then they go and they memorize the Mishnayot, the Halachot as they are, and then separately, then they'll go and derive one thing from the other and make Midrashim and further explanations. So in Eretz Yisrael, they do it all separately. In Bavel, it's all mixed together. And this is seen as a negative. Rabbi Yochanan is the greatest sage in Eretz Yisrael, and he is saying negatively about Bavel that they do it like that. And furthermore, a pasuk in Echa, b'machashakim oshibani kimete olam, amar b'Yirmiyah zeh tamuda shel Bavel. Pasuk that says, He has made me dwell in dark places, as those that have been long dead. Yirmiyah says this is the Talmud of Bavel. It's darkness because everything is all mixed up. So this is a good proof for learning everything separately. First, learning Tanakh with Peshat, understanding it as it's supposed to be, and then learning Mishnah and understanding the basics of Torah Shebe'al Peh, and only then deriving one thing from the other, and doing things in a more complex learning after one has already mastered the basics. Whereas in Bavel, everything is mixed together. We actually see this reflected in the literature that we have, because from Bavel, all we have is the Talmud Bavli. And Talmud Bavli has halacha in it, and agadah, and biblical interpretation, and everything is mixed up within the same work of the Gemara in the Bavli. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, we actually have separate works. We have the Talmud Yerushalmi, which has some agadah in it, but very little. Mostly it's halacha. And in Eretz Yisrael, they wrote their midrashim, their interpretation of Mikra separately, like Bereshit Rabbah, and all the other midrashim, including that of the Tanaic Midrashim, which are mostly halacha, and Amoraic Midrashim, which are mostly agadah. Their Midrashim, their study of Mikra, is actually placed in separate works from their Talmud, which itself is separate from the Mishnah. So we can see even in the works that we have, that in Eretz Yisrael, they in fact put everything in different works of literature, and in Bavel, everything is mixed up in one. And so again, this reflects two different methodologies. In Eretz Eretz Yisrael, they kept everything separate and everybody was nice to each other. In Bavel, they mixed everything together and everybody was combative. But interestingly, most people until today study a lot more Talmud Bavli than they do Talmud of Eretz Yisrael. Now, for the next Mishnah, Amar lo, Ne'eman alai Abba, Ne'eman alai Avicha, Ne'emanim alai shelosha ro'eh bakar, Rabbi Meir omer yachol lachazor bo, Chachamim omerim eno yachol lachazor bo. So, and back to the Zavla court, where you have two litigants and each of them are choosing judges, and one of them says, I want to choose my father. He is trusted to me. You're okay with that? Or, I want to choose your father. Even though he's your father, I want to choose him as my judge, right? And you're okay with that? And they agree. Or they agree that these three cattle herders were not known to be great geniuses. They're very simple people, maybe even illiterate. And they say, well, we want to be judged by these three cattle herders. And so they agreed to it at first. And then one of them decides, you know what, I changed my mind. I accepted your father originally as a judge, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if he's really going to be on my side. So Rabbi Meir says that you can change his mind and say, you know what, I don't want your father to be the judge. Hachamim say, no. Once you agreed in the beginning that the father will be a judge, he cannot change his mind. Right? That's it. Once you made it official and you agreed, you can no longer change your mind. That's the first case of the Mishnah. Second case, Haya chayav lachavero shivua v'amar lo dor li bechaye roshecha. Rabbi Meir omer yachol lachazor bo. Chachamim omrim en yachol lachazor bo. If one of the litigants needs to make a vow to the other one, there's various cases where someone has to make a vow. Now, an official shivua by Torah law means that the person making the vow has to hold a holy thing like a Sefer Torah and make a vow with Hashem's name. And let's say, so the one litigant has to make a vow. The other litigant says, you know what? You don't need to make a whole official vow with a Sefer Torah and everything. Just make a lower level vow by my head, right? Meaning by my life. And I'm okay with that. If you'd make a lower level vow, I'll agree. I'll accept whatever you said. But then that litigant who at first accepted that lower level vow changes his mind. Can he do so? And here also, there's a machloket. Rabbi Meir says, yes, he can change his mind. Says, no, you know what? Make the vow on the Torah. Hachamim, however, say, no, once one party agreed with the lower level vow, that's it. They cannot go back and change their minds. Amar Rav Dimi bered Rav Nachman bered Rav Yosef. Kegon de kabele ale behad. Rav Dimi, the son of Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Yosef, in describing the cases of the judges, says, we're talking about where both parties accepted, let's say the father, as one of three judges. We're not talking about a case where he said, listen, I like your father, I'll accept him as the single judge. That's it. I don't even need three judges, just one judge. No, we're not talking about a case like that, because just one judge, that's not sufficient. We're talking about a case where we're going to end up choosing three judges, but I agree, you know what, you want your father to be one of the judges, I'm okay with that. That's where the machloket is. Rabbi Meir says you can change your mind, and Chachamim say you cannot. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, machloket b'machul lecha, aval be'eten lecha, divrei hakol yachol lachazor bo. Rabbi Yochanan Amar be'eten lecha, machloket. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shemuel that the machloket at the beginning of our Mishnah is referring only to a case where it's the plaintiff that says, oh, you want your father to be the judge? Oh, that's fine. I'm okay with that. And if he rules in your favor against me, then the money that I am claiming is forgiven, right? And you won't have to pay it. That is where there's a machloket to be made. It says he can change his mind. The plaintiff can change his mind. Afterwards, Chachamim say he cannot. However, if it's the other way around, if the plaintiff is the one that had asked, hey, do you mind if my father or your father be the judge? And the defendant said, okay, fine, I will agree. And if your father, let's say it's his father, rules against me, then I will pay you. And if not, then I won't pay you. And then it's the defendant that changes his mind. In that case, everybody agrees. Even Chachamim agree that he can change his mind. Why? Because he is now actually going to have to pay. You need a lot stronger of a bet din in order to make someone take money out of his pocket and pay, compared to someone forgiving something that is owed to him. To forgive something, you don't need an official act to say, okay, I forgive it, right? Anybody could forgive it. But to make someone pay, then you need official judges. So it's a lot easier to say that you can change your mind when it's the defendant that said, first he said, I agree with your father. I'll pay if your father says I have to pay. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. That everybody agrees he can change his mind. That's the interpretation of Shemuel. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Shemuel, and he says the machloket in the Mishnah is when the defendant at first said, I will pay you if it's okay, you can use your father, and I will pay you if he rules against me. And then he changed his mind. That actually is a machloket. Okay, that's all Rabbi Yochanan said. Very short statement. So we want to elaborate. What did Rabbi Yochanan mean? Did he mean to say that it's if when the defendant says, you can use your father and I will pay you if he rules against me, and that case is subject to a machlok. Rabbi Yochanan says he can change his mind, and the Chamim say he cannot. But Rabbi Yochanan would say, in the case where it's the plaintiff that said, you can use your father and I will forgive the loan, then everybody would agree that he cannot change his mind, since it's machul lecha, which is a lot easier to do even with not an official judge. So even the Bimeid would say you cannot change your mind. According to this interpretation, Rabbi Yochanan would be the exact opposite, all the way in the other extreme of Shemuel. Is that true? Or did Rabbi Yochanan think, when he's disagreeing with Shemuel, he's saying that the machloket is regarding both cases. It doesn't matter whether it's the plaintiff or the defendant that said, I accept your father. Either one, the machloket applies. The Bimir says that they can change their mind, and Chachamim say they cannot. That's the question about the interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan. And we have an answer. Tashem hadamar Rava. Machloket beten lecha aval b'machul lecha divrei kol en yachol lachazor bo. The solution is from Rava's statement. Now Rava is a later Amorah from Bavel, whereas Rabbi Yochanan is from Eretz Yisrael. But nevertheless, Rava said that the machloket is only when the defendant says, I will give you the money. You can use your father, I will give you the money. And then that's the machloket, whether he can change his mind. However, if it's the plaintiff that says, I forgive the money, everybody would agree that he cannot change his mind. Even Rabbi Meir would agree that he cannot change his mind. Now let's analyze Rava's statement. If we interpret Rabbi Yochanan and the extreme way, that he said that if the defendant says, I will give it to you, that's where the machloket is. But if the plaintiff said, I will forgive it, then everybody agrees that he cannot change his mind. Then Rava is following Rabbi Yochanan. So then it makes sense. So we're assuming that Rava knew what Rabbi Yochanan said, and he would be consistent with it. But if we think that Rabbi Yochanan applied the machloket in all cases, then who is Rava following? Rava would not be following, not Shemuel, because he's extreme one way, and not Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan is in the middle, and Rava is extreme the other way. So Rava would not be following not Shemuel and not Rabbi Yochanan. How could that be? And the answer is simple. Rava tamad nafshe kamar. Rava has his own opinion. Rava doesn't have to follow Rabbi Yochanan or Shemuel. They're all Amoraim, and even though Rava is a later Amorah, they were first and second generation Amorim. Rava is a fourth generation Amorah, but that's okay. Rava can have his own opinion, so there's no proof from here. Iti be Rav Acha bar tachlifa l'Rava haya chayav l'chavero shevua v'amar lo dor li bechaye roshecha. Rabbi Meir omer yachol lachazor bo. Chachamim omrim en yachol lachazor bo. And now we're going to challenge Rava from the next clause in the Mishnah, where it says, if someone had to make a vow, one of the litigants, and the other one said, you know what, you don't have to make a high-level vow, it's enough that you make a vow on the life of your head. And Rabbi Meir says he can change his mind and say, no, you have to make a higher vow. And Chamim say, once you agree to the lower vow, then he cannot retract his offer. Are we not talking about a case of the defendant making the vow, and there would be a case of a defendant who makes a vow and therefore does not have to pay? And in that case, it's the plaintiff that said, oh, I'll agree to a lower vow, but then change his mind. In that case, the second clause is like machul lecha, and that would be a challenge to Rava, because Rava says that regarding machul lecha, everybody agrees that you cannot change your mind. But here, this would be in the second clause, it's a machloket in the parallel case. So we answer lo be'otana nishpein v'notlin dahavale ki'eten lecha. No, we're talking about a case where the litigant has to make a vow and then he can collect money. So it's actually the plaintiff that has to make a vow, and the defendant says, you know what, you don't have to make a high-level vow. It's okay if you want to make a lower-level vow. And then he changes his mind. He wants to change his mind and say, you know what, you have to make the higher-level vow. That would be similar to a case of, I will give it to you. And the machloket is be'eten lecha. And therefore that is consistent with Rava's interpretation as well. And now we ask, according to Rava's interpretation, the first clause of the Mishnah and the second clause of the Mishnah are teaching the same thing. They're both talking about the same case. And now a follow-up challenge against Rava. Rava, if you're going to interpret the first clause and the second clause in the same way, that both of them are eten lecha cases, where the defendant says to the plaintiff says, can I have special consideration, either to get a lower level vow, or I want my father to be the judge. And then it's the defendant that says, I will give you the money, I will accept whatever the outcome is, I will accept it. Well then, why do you need two clauses in the Mishnah to teach the same thing, that there's a machloket in a case where the defendant says, I will agree to this accommodation, and then he wants to change his mind. The Bimir says he can change his mind, Chamim say he cannot change his mind. Why do you have to tell me two examples of this principle? One would be sufficient. And the answer is, Tena tole bedat acherim, utna tole bedat asmo. No, it wants to teach that this is the law, whether he makes the outcome dependent on others. That's the case where he says, okay, your father, or whoever's father you want to be the judge can be the judge, where the outcome is dependent on someone else. That's the Resha. And the Sefa is where it's dependent on his own decision. It's what he decided. He says, yeah, you do this vow. And so you need both cases. Usricha. Ditana tole bedat acherim beha aka'amar bimeir demase hadarbe. Mishum de la gamar umakne. Damar mi emar de mezakele. Aval tole bedat asmo ema modelehu rabanan. I need both of them. Because if I only had the first clause where the defendant at first agrees, you know what? Your father can be a judge, I might think that only in this case does Rabbi Meir say that he can change his mind. Because when he first said it, he didn't totally resolve to actually give the money if the other guy's father will rule against him. Because he'll think to himself, wait a second, why did I say that? I don't know if he's going to rule in my favor. Maybe he'll rule against me. And so that's why Rabbi Meir said in that case, the defendant can change his mind. However, if it's dependent just on the vow, and that's his own decision, he just said, you know what, take this lower level vow. So there's no unknowns in this case. And he agreed you could take the lower level vow. So when he agreed, then certainly he was totally resolved in his agreement, and therefore even Rabbi Meir would agree in that case that he cannot change his mind. And so that's why I need the second clause to say that Rabbi Meir would say you can change his mind even in the case where it's dependent just on your own decision, not on anybody else. And if I only had the second clause, when it's dependent, there's no unknowns, he says, okay, you can make a vow and I'll accept it. Maybe that's where Rabbanan said that you cannot change your mind. You accepted it totally. But I might have thought that in the first case where at first the defendant said, I'll agree to your father being the judge, but then it's dependent on the third party. Actually, when I said that, I didn't really think it through, because who knows what your father's going to say? Maybe he'll rule against me. I want to change my mind. I might have thought that Rabbanan would agree with Rabbi Meir that he can change his mind, and that's why I need to state the first clause of the Mishnah also to teach me that the machloket applies both in the first case and in the second case. אמר ריש לקיש, מחלוקת לפני גמר דין, אבל לאחר גמר דין דברי הכל אין יכול לחזור בו. Rish Lakish adds another limitation on the Mishnah, and he says the machloket in the Mishnah between the Rabbi Meir and Chachamim about when one of them accepts a judge that the other proposes, that is his father or something like that, that machloket is only before the verdict is issued. Then that's where Rabbi Meir says, yes, you can change your mind. Chachamim say, no, you cannot change your mind. The verdict has not been issued yet. However, if they already issued the verdict, then everybody agrees you can't change your mind now, right? Beforehand, I accepted your father as one of the judges. Now they judged and they said, oh, guilty, you have to pay. Oh, I changed my mind. I don't accept your father as one of the judges. No, then it's too late. That makes sense. That's Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan amar lachar gemar din machloket. Rabbi Yochanan says that the machloket applies after the verdict. Amazing. Now we want to clarify Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. When Rabbi Yochanan, he just said these short words. The machloket is after the verdict. What did he mean by that? Did he mean that after the verdict, that's when Rabbi Meir disagrees with Chachamim? However, before the verdict, everybody agrees that you can change your mind. Even Chachamim would say, oh, the verdict didn't happen yet? Okay, that's fine, you can change your mind. Is that the case? Or does Rabbi Yochanan say that it doesn't matter whether it's before the verdict or after the verdict? Rabbi Meir always says you can change your mind, and Chachamim say you can never change your mind, and it makes no difference whether it's before or after the verdict. So what did Rabbi Yochanan mean by that? And here's the answer. Tashema damar Rava, kibel alav karov o pasul, lifnei gemar din yachol lachazor bo, lachar gemar din en yachol lachazor bo. Rava gave a ruling. And he said that if someone accepted a relative or an otherwise disqualified judge to be a judge, he says that's okay. We both agree that this person will be a judge. If the verdict was not given yet, then he can change his mind. Afterwards, he cannot change his mind. So Rava is giving a bottom line halacha. We assume that he's following Chachamim. So let's analyze. If we interpret Rabbi Yochanan as saying that the machloket only applies after the verdict, but before the verdict, everybody agrees that you can change your mind, then Rava would be following Rabbi Yochanan, and he's following the opinion of Chachamim, and that explains why before Gemar Din, so there everybody agrees that you can change your mind, and that so including Chachamim, and that's why he said before the verdict, yes, you can change your mind, but after the verdict, that's where there is a machloket, and we follow Chachamim who say you cannot change your mind. And so, if Rava is following Rabbi Yochanan, then if we interpret Rabbi Yochanan this way, then Rava would be following Rabbi Yochanan. Everything's good. V'alibad Rabbanan, within the machloket, we're following Rabbanan over to Rabbi Meir. Ela yamad ben bezo machloket. Rava damar keman. But if the machloket is in all cases and you're following Chachamim lahalacha, that would mean that one can never change his mind, not even before the verdict, because if the machloket applies in both, and then Rava wouldn't be following nobody. Ela rather, it must be that Rava's statement is following Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan thought that the machloket is only after the verdict, but not before. Interestingly, beforehand, when we had a similar structure, we said, well, Rava might have his own opinion. Who says he has to be following someone? But over here, we assume that Rava is following Rabbi Yochanan. It could be that Rava's formulation here is not as a commentary, but rather as a final halacha. And if he's giving a final halacha, then we presume he would want to have the authority of an earlier Amorah. Yes, he could disagree with an earlier Amorah, and if he's explaining something, but as a final halacha, he's most likely following an Amorah before, and therefore it makes more sense if we interpret Rabbi Yochanan in this way, so Rava can be in agreement with him. Shalach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. Yilamdenu Rabenu lifnei gemar din machloket o lachar gemar din machloket. Now, even though we just discussed this and we concluded based on what Rava said, but other Amoraim still continued to discuss this. And one Rav Nachman, Bar Chisda, asked a different Rav Nachman, Bar Yaakov, can you please teach us the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim? Does it apply only before the verdict or also after the verdict? And furthermore, whose opinion do we follow? They're only arguing afterwards. If it's before the verdict, everybody agrees you can change your mind. And after the verdict, we follow Chachamim that you cannot change your mind. Rav Ashi Amar, Hachi shelach le, be'eten lecha machloket or machol lecha machloket, v'alach k'divrei mi. Rav Ashi has a different version of the question that Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda asked Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He wasn't asking about before Gemar Din or after Gemar Din, but rather on the previous discussion. If it's the defendant that says, listen, you can pick whoever you want as judge and I will pay you. And then the defendant decides, you know what, I want to change my mind. Can he do that? Is that the machlok? Is that where the machloket is? Or between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim? Or is it when the plaintiff says, you know what, you can choose whoever you want, and then I will forgive it? Which way is in which case does the machloket apply? And furthermore, who do we follow for halacha? And he sent back that the machloket is when the defendant says, you know what, I will give it to you, and then he wants to change his mind. That's where Chachamim say, no, you cannot change your mind because you already agreed that you're going to give it to him. And all the more so if it was the plaintiff, then everybody would agree that he cannot change his mind because it's easier to go that way. And the halacha is like Chachamim, so in the end that would mean that you can never, once you agree on a judge, either way, you cannot change your mind. The above question, that was the version as it was taught in the Yeshiva and Surah. However, in the Yeshiva and Pumbedita, they formulated this discussion a little bit differently, and they said, Amar Rav Chanina bar Shelemya, Shelachu le mibe Rav lishmuel, Yomdenu Rabenu, Lifnei Gemar Din, Vekanu miyado mai. So, according to this version, the Bemidrash of Rav asked Shemuel, can you please teach us? Let's say one of the litigants wants to change his mind. He said, okay, I agree that your father could be the judge. And he wants to change his mind before the verdict, but they did a formal act of acquisition. It wasn't only verbal that he said, yeah, that's okay, you can use your father as a judge. They actually did an act to say, and I will pay you or be paid, all right, if the verdict goes against me, and they actually do a formal act. How about in that case? Can you change his mind? Shalach lehu en lachad kinyan kelum. And the Shemuel answered, the house of the study of Rav says, no, once you do an actual act, then you can definitely you cannot change your mind. All right, that's the end of that discussion. Next Mishnah. Velo and Pesulin. The following people are disqualified from being witnesses. Hamesechek bekubiya. Someone who plays with dice. Here's a kubiya. Kubiya here comes from the Greek and same as the English, cube. Someone who plays with cube, meaning a gambler. Vamalbe beribit, and someone who lends money with interest. It's wonderful to lend money, but not with interest. With interest, that's a prohibition. Umafriche yonim, and those who fly pigeons, pigeon racers, kind of gambling. And people who sell Shivi'it produce. During the Shivi'it year, everything that grows is ifked, and everybody can take just for themselves, just what they need. But you can't hoard it, and you can't sell it. And so all these people, because they violate sins, they are disqualified from being witnesses. Gemara will discuss exactly what's wrong with them, and especially the gambler. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Betechilah yukorinotan osfe shevi'it, misherabu hanasin chazru likrotan sochare shevi'it. Rabbi Shimon says, at first, the people who collected the produce on Shavuot and sold it, we used to call them the gatherers during Shavuot. During Shavuot, you can gather a little bit for your house, but you can't hoard it in your house. However, when the tax collectors, a tax collector is called an anas, which literally means someone who commits extortion or forces someone to do something. These tax collectors, they weren't fair tax collectors working for the government or government employees, but rather these were private companies that would farm taxes and then take a cut and give the rest to the government. They made a deal. They were private contractors that were hired by the government, and they would do a really good job and take sometimes a lot more than they were supposed to, and then they kept all the extra that they took. So really, they were not legal tax collectors. They were just committing extortion. So when there were a lot of these tax collectors, then they changed the terminology. Instead of calling them the gatherers on Shavuot, they called them the merchants who trade in the produce of Shavuot. The Gemara will explain what the significance is on this change of name. It's tomorrow. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ematai bizman she'en lahem umanut elahu, aval yesh lahen umanut shelohu kesherin. Rabbi Yehuda says, when do we say that a gambler is disqualified? Only if he has no other job. All he does is gamble. He's a professional gambler. That's how he makes his living. However, then he's no good. However, if he has another job and he just does some gambling on the side, but he has a proper job besides that, then he can be a witness. So we will analyze this phrase, misachek bekubiyah, someone who plays with dice. Mai ka'abid. So what is he doing wrong? So what? So he's playing dice. Why does that make him disqualified from being a witness? Amar Rami bar Chama, mishum dava asmachta v'asmachta lakanya. The reason is because it basically is a thief. When someone is betting, people don't usually gamble if they think they're going to lose. Both sides actually think they're going to win. So he says, okay, if I get this dice, then I'll pay you. Otherwise, you pay me. And so he's thinking in his head. Both sides are thinking, I'm going to win, and he'll pay me. If he ends up losing, he never actually committed and decided and committed that he was going to give over money. Therefore, if and when he loses and then he has to pay, he's actually being robbed. The person who wins in the gambling game is robbing the loser, because it's not like they totally agreed beforehand. Oh, if I lose, then I will give over the money. Here it is, right? Here's the money right now. I am totally agreeing and legally giving it to you. It's not the way gamblers usually think. Usually they're thinking, oh, for sure I'm going to win. I feel it. I have good luck. And then when they lose, they feel like, oh, you stole my money. That is how a lot of times gamblers feel, right? You feel you lost a poker bet. I can't believe he took my money. So because the loser feels like he is being robbed, and that means he never actually agreed to give over the money. That means the winner is a robber, and a robber cannot be a witness. Rav Sheshat Amar, Kol ki haikavna lav asmachtahi. Rav Sheshat, no. In this kind of gambling, it's not asmachta. The people that are gambling, they know they might lose and they're going to pay. That this is not called asmachta, which means a bet that you don't sincerely agree to. No, that's not the problem. Ela lefish en asukin bishubo shel olam. Rather, it's a different problem that people that are gambling are not involving themselves in settling the world. You're not being a productive citizen of the world. Go produce something. Go manufacture something. Offer products. Offer a service. Do something that makes the world better. Here, you're making money just by taking it from other people, but you're not doing anything positive in the world. And that's a problem. It means that you don't care about society. And how can you be a witness? To be a witness means, right, I am an upstanding person. I care about people. I care about society. Okay, so then you're trustworthy, a person of integrity, someone who can spend his whole life and not do something that's productive in the world, then they are not a respected member of society. They'll care about people and cannot be trusted to be a witness. My benai will be a practical case where they would disagree, and it'll make a difference which reason you say. Ika benai de gamar umanuta achariti. Oh, make a difference if he has another occupation. According to Rami bar Chama, who says it's stealing. It doesn't matter if you have another occupation. You could have worked in a good job all day, but then at night you played one poker game and you won, then you are stealing because the other person didn't want to give the money, he never agreed to it, and that's it, you're a thief. So even if you have a regular job, but you're a thief, so it's no good. Whereas, according to the opinion of Rav Sheshat, the problem is that you're not contributing to society. But if you are contributing to society because you have a regular job, so good. You make pots all day. Yeah, that's very good. And so the fact that you did a little gambling on the side would not disqualify that person. Good. Utanan Amar Rabbi Yehuda Emata Bizman she'en lahem umanut elahu aval yesh lahen umanut shelohu hareze kesherim alma tamad matitin v'shum yishubo shel olam hu kashyad Rami Bar Chama. Now this case that your board has a distinction between the two happens to be the very criteria that Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, who right now we assume is a minority opinion going against Chachamim, he says, when is a gambler no good to be a witness? Only if that's his only profession. He's a professional gambler. But if he has another profession, then he's kosher. So you see here that the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is because of Yeshivo Shel Olam. And because you're not contributing to society. Rabbi Yehuda says, if you are contributing to society, then you're okay. So we have a challenge from Rabbi Yehuda's opinion against Rami Bar Chama. Right? Rami Bar Chama said it's because you're stealing. If indeed you're stealing, then even if you have another job, you'll be disqualified from being a witness. So Rami Bar Chama's reasoning is not consistent with Rabbi Yehuda. So I know you have a good answer. Easy. We can say that Rabbi Yehuda is a minority opinion, but the Tanakama in the Mishnah is the Rabbanan is the majority opinion, and Rami Bar Chama is explaining Tanakama. Tanakama did not make this limitation. They said it doesn't matter whether you have a job or not. You're disqualified if you do some gambling, and that would be consistent with Rami Bar Chama, who says a gambler is a thief. But we cannot say that. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, kol makom shamar Rabbi Yehuda ematai ubameh eno ela lefaresh divrei chachamim. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi in Amorah made a rule that anytime Rabbi Yehuda says the words ematai or bameh, meaning as a qualification of the opinion before, when is that true, or in what case is that true? He is only explaining chachamim, not disagreeing with them. And so if we look back here, Rabbi Yehuda says the word ematai. When is that true? That means Rabbi Yehuda is explaining Tanakama here, right? Skip Rabbi Shimon, and he is not disagreeing, and so that means Tanakama. Everybody, in fact, would agree that if someone has another job, then they're qualified. That's okay. So this is a serious challenge against Rami Bar Chama. And Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan had a slightly different role than Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. He says ematai lefaresh ubameh Lachalok udekula alma ematai lefareshu. Rabbi Yochanan says the terminology ematai, when Rabbi Yehuda says that means he's explaining the first opinion, and bameh, that one is disagreeing with the first opinion. But in any case, our Mishnah says the word ematai, and both Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan agree that the word ematai is not indicating a disagreement, but rather just a further explanation. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is the only opinion here, meaning Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda are the same. Rabbi Yehuda is just explaining Chachamim, and he says, so everybody agrees that if you have another job, then you can be a witness. That means that the problem is Yishuvo Shel Olam, and it's not a problem of gambling. Challenge to Rami Bar Chama. And we answer, Gabra Karamit, Mosaba Pelige, Mosabar La Pelige. What you're asking a question against Rami Bar Chama from Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, they're all Amoraim. So, okay, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan are earlier Amoraim. They're very important Amoraim, that's true. But Rami Bar Chama is a little bit later, but he's also an Amorah. And he can argue, and he doesn't agree with this rule. Rami Bar Chama can simply say that ematai also is indicating a machloket, and so therefore Rami Bar Chama is following the Tanakama, who says that this person is disqualified across the board. Doesn't matter if he has a job or not, because he is a thief. And only the Rabbi Yehuda would be following the other opinion that says because of Yishuvo Shel Olam, if you have a job, then you're contributing to society, then that's okay. Now we ask, Vela Pelige. Now we're going to ask a question the other way against Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Really, do you think that Rabbi Yehuda has no disagreement with Tanakama? The whole Mishnah is one opinion. V'atanya ben sheyesh lo manut shelohu ben she'en lo manut elahu hareze pasul. We have a braita that expresses an opinion that says it doesn't matter whether that's his only job, only gambling, or whether he has another job besides gambling, or whether he has no other job. It doesn't matter. He is pasul, and so this clearly follows Rami bar Chama, and you can't say that the Mishnah has only one opinion, and everybody agrees that it's because of Yeshuvot Shel Olam, because here's a Braita that says it does depend on whether you have, that it doesn't depend on whether you have a job or not. So how can you say that? How can Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yosha ben Levi say that the entire Mishnah is following Rabbi Yehuda and the reasoning of Yeshuvot Shel Olam when, and that means everybody agrees to that, when we have a Braita that clearly says like Rami bar Chama? And the answer is, Hahi, Rabbi Yehuda mishum Rabbi Tarfon hi. This Braita is a different opinion, not any of the opinions in the Mishnah. It's in fact the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who was speaking not on his own behalf, but on behalf of Rabbi Tarfon. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Tarfon le'olam en echad mehem nazir lefi shelo nitana nazirut ela lehafla'a. This is a braita where Rabbi Yehuda says the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon, that if you have two people that are betting on something, and one guy says, if you're right, I'll be a Nazir. Another guy says, no, if you're right, then I'll be a Nazir. And then turns out, whatever, one of them is right, one of them is wrong. The halacha is neither of them are a Nazir, because in order to be a Nazir, you have to accept it upon yourself explicitly. It can't be dependent on if something happens, then I'll be a Nazir, then the Nizirut does not apply. Only if you're definitely sure about something. So we see that according to this opinion, an asmachta, a kind of a bet like this, is not legally valid. When someone says, if I'm wrong, then I'll do something, they only say that because they think they're actually right, and they never really agree. So just like they never really agreed to be a Nazir, if they're not a Nazir, so too the same would apply to gambling. That when someone says, if you win, I'll pay you $1,000, he never really means to pay, because this is asmachta, and asmachta is not a real commitment, and therefore the person is a thief. So this baraita for sure says that someone who gambles is a thief and would be consistent with Rami bar Chama. But the other opinions, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yosha ben Levi, can say, this baraita is a separate opinion. It's not the same as the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah is giving his own opinion, and that is in fact the only opinion in the Mishnah, that is dependent on Yeshuvah Shel Olam, and therefore if he has another job, then he's a valid witness. And this baraita is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, and this baraita indeed would be in agreement with the reason of Rami bar Chama. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.